Good afternoon again to all. It's a difficult time for all of us. And particularly, I always feel when I'm speaking now that I feel somewhat inadequate. Some of you and others who may be listening or will be listening have children who are on the front lines. Um, uh, you know, uh, it's hard for me to give chizuk to those families who really need it. But let's all share in some thoughts. What I'd like to do is I did when the first time that we did this, I'd like to learn something with you. And from what we're learning, I believe we will be able to gain a degree of chizuk for the days ahead. I'd like to raise what would seem to be an unconnected question. And that is, why does the Torah include in its record the last chapter of Noach's life? Why does the Torah talk about the fact that he plants a vineyard and that he gets drunk and all that happens? Why is that important for us to know? And why does the Torah include it in the narrative? Of course, everything we believe, everything that's in the Torah has a purpose, has a meaning. I believe we can understand this last chapter, this last really tragic chapter of Noah's life, if we take a look at a fascinating pattern that emerges earlier in the Torah. When Noach and his family go into the Teva, the Torah is very specific about how they go in. I had this marked. The Torah says, Vayovo Noach uvanav ve'ishto u'neshei vanav ito el ha'teva. And as the commentaries point out, it says Noach and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the Teva. And clearly there is a distinction, there's a delineation between the men and the women. Chazal explained this. They explained it in a very appropriate way. They said, while there is destruction occurring in the world, while the world is being destroyed with the flood, you should not be participating in full family life. Husbands and wives should not be together. They should be separate at this point. You should not be enjoying each other's company in its fullness. You should be mourning the loss of life, and you should be mourning what's happening outside in the world. When the flood ends, Hashem's directive is very clear. Hashem says to Noach and his family, Tzei min ha-teva, leave the Teva, exit the ark, Ata v'ishtecha uvanecha u'neshei vanecha itach. You and your wife and your sons and their wives with you. And again, the nuances of the text are so critically important. Here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Noach, come back together. The flood is over. It's time to move on. It's time to create a new world. It's time to resume your family life, to propagate the world. Go out with your wife, have your sons go out with their wives as well. But what's fascinating is that 2 sentences later, the Torah tells us the following. Vayetze Noach uvanav ve'ishto u'neshei vanav ito. Noach does not listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's directive. And he goes out the way he came in. He leaves the Teva separate from his wife, and his children, the sons, are separate as well. And this then leads to a pattern that emerges from this moment onward. Over and over again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tries to give Noach chizuk when he speaks to him. He says to him over and again, propagate the world, replenish the world, build a new world. It's time to start. And Noach apparently doesn't listen. Now we can come to that last chapter in Noach's life. What is it describing? It's describing a man who emerges out of a teva to total destruction, total devastation. And faced with that devastation, he is unable to move on. The only thing he can do is plant a vineyard and drink himself into oblivion. He can't face this challenge. He can't face the challenge that he must face at this particular point together with his family of creating what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants him to create, which is a world after the flood. And whenever I read this section, I think to myself about our own people. Particularly, I think about, and I'm an American-born child to American-born parents, so this is not part of my experience. But I think of the survivors of the Shoah who came out to a devastation equivalent to the devastation that Noach faced when he came out of the Teva. And I think of the tremendous, tremendous debt that we owe to that generation. To so many of them who were able to not put the past behind them. They carried it with them. You couldn't leave it behind. It was there. I remember there was one particular time we had a neighbor across the street, a woman, a widow, who used to come to us for the Seder. And she was a survivor of Auschwitz and other camps. And she never really spoke about it until one year we had at our Seder, often we had young Russian students from Yeshiva University would come because I was in charge of teaching them. And at one point she turned to these students and she said, "A night does not go by where I don't have nightmares of those years." She dreams about it every night. And yet she had the courage and the tenacity to rebuild her life and to have a family and to have a child. And I think of all of the other survivors who created and with tremendous strength, rebuilt their lives, facing the devastation of lost families, facing the devastation of not only lost parents, lost siblings, and in many cases, lost wives and children. And how they finally were somehow able to pick themselves up and go forward. And I contrast that to Noach in my mind. And I say that's what the Torah is teaching us. Noach is compared to Avram over and over again by Chazal, and Avram always emerges higher. And one of the reasons he emerges higher, I believe, is because within his soul and within the soul of the Jew is the ability to not move past tragedy. No, not to leave it behind, not to forget it. Those individuals who were so brutally murdered on Simchas Torah this year should always be with us. They should always be remembered. But once the dust settles, and Bezras Hashem, it should settle quickly and with as little pain as possible, and we're facing some very complex challenges ahead. But when the dust settles, we are a people that will find a way to go on. We will carry those memories with us. They'll make us stronger. We will find a way to go on, and that's the Chizuk that I would share with you today, that there will be. I don't know when it will be. I don't know it will be next week or next month or in 4 months. I don't know, but there will be a day after where we will be able to say, we're carrying those we've lost with us, but we're moving forward. And this, by the way, is the way Rav Soloveitchik defines nechama. The word nechama, which is used in the Torah in very strange ways, which we define as consolation, says the Rav, consolation is not moving past a loss. Consolation is not forgetting the loss or leaving it behind. Consolation occurs when we recognize a new reality, and we are prepared to move on with that reality. Nechama comes. The Shiva de Nechemta comes after Tisha B'Av when we say this is the reality of our world, and now we've got to change it, we've got to build it, we've got to somehow move on. And there will be a day after, and there will be a time of Nechama when we are going to be able to move on and rebuild, and somehow find a way to live in peace within this country. Be'ezras Hashem, it should happen b'mheira v'yameinu. It should happen quickly. It should happen speedily. And our efforts using the image of our own people, of our own survivors who have survived so much, will give us the strength to move on, and the families that lost the strength to move on, to rebuild their worlds, because that is the stuff that we are made of, and that's why we're here today, because we are not just survivors. We're more than that. We're thrivers. We find a way to rebuild and to move on, and we will. I'd like to close as we did last time with the recitation of three, in this case, the three tefillot that I will recite. I ask that you please listen, and if you have the text, good. If not, then just with me, just think of them. The first tefillah is the tefillah for Tzahal. Bishaberach Avoseinu Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov u'Yivorech es chayolei Tzahal v'ano Yisrael v'amshei kolchos habitachon. Omdim ha'mishmar atzenu v'yorei Eloheinu migvul halvanon v'yad midbar Mitzrayim. ומן היום הגדול עד לבוא ערבו וכל מקום שהם ביבשה באוויר ובים. ייתן אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו ניגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה. וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם ויעטרם בחסר ישועה ועטרת ניצחון. ויקוים בהם הכתוב כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם להושיע אתכם ונאמר Amen. The tefillah for the shvuyim, for the captives. Mishaberach Avoseinu Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov Yosef Moshe v'Aaron David u'Shlomo. U'Yivorech v'Yishmor v'Yitzor es Achenu Beis Yisrael v'Nedrei Tzvo ha'Hagana Yisrael v'Es ha'Shvuyim. Bavur Sheko HaKol Mispalel Ba'avura. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimale Racham Yimalehem Yishmerem Mikol Tzara V'Tzuka Mikol Nega U'Machalo. V'Yishlach Bracha V'Atzlacha B'chol Masei Yedehem. Yotziem Mechoshech V'Tzam Aves. V'Yishivem Mehira L'Cheik Mishpechosehem V'Nomar Amen. Finally, a prayer for those who are injured, that they should experience a speedy recovery. Refuah Shlema. V'shaberach Avoseinu Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Moshe v'Aaron David u'Shlomo v'Imoseinu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah. V'Yivorech v'Yirapeh es kol mi sheniftzeu b'milchama u'v'piguim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimale Racham Yimaleim lachlimom l'raposam lachzikom u'layachayosam. וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה מן השמיים לכל איבריהם ולכל גידיהם בסוף שור חולי ישראל. רפואת הנפש, רפואת הגוף, פשטה והגולה בזמן קריב ונאמר אמן. And finally, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, עומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוצאים מצרה לרווחה, מאפלה לאורה, Bishibud Begula. Ashtav Bagolov is Man Koriv Vinomar Amen. Thank you for joining me. Be'ezras Hashem. Hashem should hear our tefillah.